we have a culture of a society where we feel that there's civil order that is established and maintained by police, that we can call 911 and someone will show up at some point. Now, of course, certain areas that have more funding, of course, gets that. And some areas that, I mean, there are areas that police won't even enter because the local gang or the local mafia or whatever group, that controls that area have basically made it untenable for any law enforcement type of individual to go in. I mean,
well, just
right?
look at your friends. It's that hate ICE.
Oh yeah.
Efforts.
Yeah.
The ICE efforts have been attenuated and bridled back because protesters say, well, we don't want these people, basically rounding up illegal aliens, even though these people are here illegally. And, I understand there were certain instances where it was very materialistic and very aggressive, but I don't necessarily have an issue. And I've been profiled. I'm Hispanic. I've been profiled, particularly when I was younger, many times. But on the other hand, I remember saying to myself, I'm being stopped because I live in a blighted area, and people that look like me are the ones committing most of the crime.
Yeah.
So I had to intellectualize away my antipathy toward being profiled. And intellectually, I said, I kind of understand why these cops are stopping me, because people who look like me in this area are the ones committing most of the crime.
Yeah.
And what I don't get is, why can't, particularly the fat politicians on either side, why can't they just try to insert some more intellectualization? Well, I think they're all disgusting pigs. Quote me on that. Why can't they try to insert a little more intellectualization when they're making policy, or when they're critiquing, the people on the other side of the aisle, or when they're trying to assess a policy? Instead of invoking their belief system, try to intellectualize. Because I was raised to believe we were oppressed as Hispanics in the blighted area. But I transcended my belief system and said, people that are committing most of the crime in this neighborhood are people that look like me. That's why I got stopped. I don't like it, but I intellectually understand it. That's what I mean about transcending away from a belief system which causes false truths or attitudes that in some way can be very damaging, not only to thyself, but to your community.
Yeah. I mean, this is actually how they train, like, for instance, at circus, right? Have these massive elephants.
Good day, everybody, and welcome to another iteration of Inside Reality. Thanks for having us back. We had some technical issues that we resolved and ultimately ameliorated, so the quality of the show should be better. This is Jeffrey Candelier. That's Jimmy Tran. Hopefully you'll like, share, comment, but somehow participate in some of the commentary that we provide. And we try to take an objective, dispassionate, not always dispassionate on my end, take on relevant issues. And today's topic is going to be truth is a function of one's belief system. Generally speaking, whatever belief system you subscribe to will end up dictating, extrapolating out your truth. So that's why I've argued since the inception of this show, I don't really believe there's a ubiquitous ultimate truth. I think there's relative truth, and each of us carve out our own sense of what our reality and truth is based on our belief system. And Freud would argue that we're always denying death. So that's another layer to all of that. But let's go ahead and get right into it, Jimmy. Outcomes are usually framed by a society's belief system, or to granulize it further, the individual belief system generally already dictates what the outcome is in terms of how they believe, how they behave, what they subscribe to, their version of truth.
Yeah. Let me just preface a couple of things real quick from what you said. So one thing is that I do believe that there's a kind of an absolute truth, in the sense that there's the framework of where the truth is. There's also the perceived truth, is what you're talking about, where we perceive something to be true a certain way. And some of that is partly due to the belief system.
What's an absolute truth?
So an absolute truth, like, for instance, gravity is an absolute truth.
Absolutely wrong. You're wrong again, because the 400-year-old Newtonian, it's probably 300-year-old scientific subscription to what gravity is has changed in the last 10 years based
Okay.
on our newest revelation as to how the universe works and operates.
Okay,
Dark matter, dark energy, all
okay,
that. So
but
there's
remember, every
another
time
example of every time science says there's an absolute truth, a generation or two or three later, that absolute truth is deemed spurious or relative and it has to be amended. So
yeah, well,
your
you
argument that gravity is an absolute truth is
well,
just not,
let me clarify. Okay,
it's
give me a moment.
unfounded.
Okay, give me a moment to clarify. What I'm
Go ahead.
referring, I'm referring. I mean, yeah, we labeled it gravity, but it doesn't mean that the principles in which the gravitational, however we want to describe it. I mean, of course, what you're talking about, like the mathematical functions and all that, those, of course, will vary as we develop a better understanding of our science and, have better instruments of detection and all that. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm saying the absoluteness of truth. I'm talking about the absolute truth in the sense that there's this property that we perceive in this realm in our modern understanding at the moment as what we call gravity. I mean, obviously that can be reframed in a different way. And I mean, there's actually a study I was reading about that talks about that gravity is not just, I mean, well, we've come to understand that gravity is more of a field. And there's even an idea that gravity is more than even just a field, but rather gravity could literally be kind of like, think of it as like a not just a force like we talk about. I mean, meaning that gravity is really kind of like a byproduct of something that's happening in a different dimension. So here's an example, right? We know about electricity, right? So electricity, when you have a current flowing through a wire, okay, that wire now has a current. Okay, that's what a current is when there's electrical field, electrical flow through the wire. When that happens, it induces a magnetic field. Okay, now that magnetic field, according to the Maxwell equation, tells us that magnetic field is perpendicular to the path of the electric field, which tells us at that point that if it's perpendicular, that means it's in a different dimension. Okay, so already we see these properties of science.
You're going off on some esoteric tangent that doesn't make any sense and is actually contrary to absolute truth because you can't prove it. How does this relate to our topic, which is truth is a function of one's personal belief system? And by the way, according to astrophysics, because I study this stuff, only 4% of the entire universe that we know of, at least to this point in time, is made up of matter. The other 96% is made up of dark energy and dark matter.
Yeah, but you know why they call it dark?
And science doesn't even know what the hell either of those are.
Correct.
So there is no absolute truth. Let's get back to our topic. These systems generally will predict your outcome based on your version of truth.
Sure.
There is no absolute truth. That's like this whole nonsense about we the people, American values. American values are a function of the individual based on where they live, what state they live, what economic system they're tied to, and so forth.
On some
That's
level,
another
yes.
example.
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
so get back to the topic. What is your interpretation of one's belief system is a function of their truth? Let's stay on topic.
Okay, well, it is within the same topic. I'm just pointing out that when it comes to science, we try to, in that framework, we try to, create scenarios where we can have experimental reality that comes from, a control study, right? You have the control and then you have the variable. And then when you make those changes using the scientific method, you can prove itself to be true of course, to an extent. You're right. I mean, Einstein's came along.
Science is only it's basically a discipline of probability. That's all it is.
Well,
it's not
yes.
absolute truth. Science doesn't claim absolute truth. It claims
Correct.
probability.
That's fine.
So once again, there is your argument
No,
that there's
no.
absolute truth. It's spurious. Can you give us examples in society of today's topic? Let's do that. How's that?
So
Truth is a function of one's belief system.
yeah, okay. So if we believe, let's say, we have in the Western world, we believe that there's a certain equality between men and women, right? As an example, right? So in that scenario, there was this push for For instance, the voting rights so that women had that. I mean, so that's one of the ways in which our belief system drives, that outcome. Now, of course, there's always going to be individuals or systems in the background that, perhaps either because of the established order that may not want a certain outcome, and so therefore that happens, So, but in terms of that example, I mean, would you say that because there's a certain belief that framed this? I mean, because we don't have the same thing in other parts of the country.
I'm talking about this. All this nonsense about equality in the United States, that's another myth. Equality is a function of how much money and resource you have, how much determination you have, who you know.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of a ubiquitous, complete, absolute systemic equality throughout every population that's a citizen of the United States is just dumb. And then the Democrats further demolish that construct because most of the woke liberal Democrats assign almost more preferential equality and treatment and justice to non-citizens, There's this little freak guy that just killed that. She was kind of no offense, kind of overweight young lady in Loyola that was murdered by this illegal alien, okay? And the paper in Loyola, I guess that's in Chicago. I don't know where the hell it's at. The newspaper covering the story, the student paper, said, we don't want to refer to the alleged perpetrator of the crime as an illegal alien because that's offensive. So this is where populations, liberal woke populations, afford more sensibilities to the alleged perpetrator of a murderer who's not even a damn citizen than the victim, who was a citizen and an active participant in the collegial population in Loyola. This is the kind of crap I'm talking about.
Yeah. But what does that have to do with?
It's a belief system. They believe that non-citizens, because they've been, subject to, I don't know, the harshness of coming to our country, whatever, oppression, that belief system is so robust and strong that it usurps, it actually supersedes our own citizenry in this country, namely this one particular, young lady. I guess she was like 17, 18, 19 years of age. She must have been at least 18 because she was a college student. And that belief system affords non-citizen illegal aliens more respect, more regard than a United States citizen, namely this young woman who was murdered.
Yeah. Well, that has to do more. I mean, you're talking about, I'm not familiar with this particular incident, but, again, this is one of the scenarios that are framed by the individuals in the media that chooses to cover that, right? I mean, that's really where they are. And so we've talked before about how media has a certain belief. The general media, mainstream media.
Media doesn't work if people don't believe in what the media is propagating.
Yeah. So
the propaganda that some of these outlets are putting forth doesn't work if populations don't consume it and don't assimilate it as the truth. Yeah. As the truth.
That's correct. That's how the manipulation stuff works, right? I mean, you put up a framework, and then you have enough people that are in that mindset to buy in on it. I mean, I'll drop a video. There's a video of this really interesting experiment that was done. Okay, you probably seen it. The basketball, bouncing the basketball, counting the basketball. Have you seen that?
So I'm familiar with the Milgram experiment, 61, 62, where he electrified people under controlled circumstances, and 90% or something of all people, like actually electrified or caused an electronic, in their mind, an electronic shock to literally injure the person on the other side of the window. Obviously, that was a controlled situation. The person wasn't really being electrocuted. What was shocking, no pun, is that something like 70, 89% of the participants basically just acquiesced to authority.
Well,
a man dressed up as a doctor in a
lab coat,
in a white, uniform, or what's that called? The white,
the lab coat. That's what he was wearing.
Lab coat. There you go.
So,
but the point is authority. They believed authority was so important that they would literally electrocute a colleague on the other side of the window who had done nothing other than to have agreed to participate in a experiment.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because that was actually an experiment. My understanding is that he wasn't wanting to understand why and how the Nazis
why the Nazis
did what they did to in the Holocaust, and so he set up he's like, there's no way that people would actually do what they did, and then this experiment really showed how people, because of their belief system, like you were saying, you point out the authority figure created the scenario where people were able to, I guess you could say, well, I was told to do it, so therefore, I was just following order. That was the mindset that the people had, and so as a result,
but the Nuremberg trials
was where we revealed a lot of this stuff. Yeah,
revealed it, but also set a precedent that's contrary to just because you're doing your duty.
Agreed.
If it's an inhumane act, that isn't an excuse.
Correct.
So the other theme from the Nuremberg trial, 46, 48, somewhere in there, was evil triumphs when men stand back and do nothing.
Yeah.
So just by ignoring a heinous crime or whatever, whoever you is, you're participating in the act by doing nothing about it.
Well, that raises the point too that that's also a belief, right? We believe in that scenario. This person is believing that somebody else will take care of it. And really, if you really, we can take it even further and look at our society. We live in this very civilized, and I'm going to put that in quote, society. Okay. So because we live in a more civilized society where it's not like just where jungle warfare, meaning that we can walk down the street with relative, certainty that somebody's not going to jump out and attack us, right? At least not in
it
certain
depends
areas.
on where you live. If you live in Detroit
no, I understand that.
South Chicago, or
again, this is
go to parts of Albuquerque. That's not a true statement.
Correct. But what I'm saying is that we have a certain belief about that we live in a civil society, and so
that's not true either.
Well,
when I was growing up, kids would let their kids go outside and ride bikes. Society has changed completely. Their attitudes toward safety are not the same as they were before.
That's what I'm saying.
No way.
That's what I'm saying is that we have a culture of a society where we feel that there's civil order that is established and maintained by police, that we can call 911 and someone will show up at some point. Now, of course, certain areas that have more funding, of course, gets that. And some areas that, there are areas that police won't even enter because the local gang or the local mafia or whatever group, that controls that area have basically made it untenable for any law enforcement type of individual to go in.
Well, just look at your friends. It's that hate ICE.
Oh yeah,
efforts.
Yeah.
The ICE efforts have been attenuated and bridled back because protesters say, well, we don't want these people, basically rounding up illegal aliens, even though these people are here illegally. And, I understand there were certain instances where it was very materialistic and very aggressive, but I don't necessarily have an issue. And I've been profiled. I'm Hispanic. I've been profiled, particularly when I was younger, many times. But on the other hand, I remember saying to myself, I'm being stopped because I live in a blighted area, and people that look like me are the ones committing most of the crime.
Yeah.
So I had to intellectualize away my antipathy toward being profiled. And intellectually, I said, I kind of understand why these cops are stopping me, because people who look like me in this area are the ones committing most of the crime.
Yeah.
And what I don't get is, why can't, particularly the fat politicians on either side, why can't they just try to insert some more intellectualization? Well, I think they're all disgusting pigs. Quote me on that. Why can't they try to insert a little more intellectualization when they're making policy, or when they're critiquing, the people on the other side of the aisle, or when they're trying to assess a policy? Instead of invoking their belief system, try to intellectualize. Because I was raised to believe we were oppressed as Hispanics in the blighted area. But I transcended my belief system and said, people that are committing most of the crime in this neighborhood are people that look like me. That's why I
Yeah.
got stopped. I don't like it, but I intellectually understand it. That's what I mean about transcending away from a belief system which causes false truths or attitudes that in some way can be very damaging, not only to thyself, but to your community.
Yeah. I mean, this is actually how they train, like, for instance, at circus, right? Have these massive elephants, and
The elephants with the little chain.
with the little,
Yeah.
but they didn't actually have them on a chain. They just have them on a rope because they've been trained
Fine.
to, but when they were small as a young elephant, okay, whatever you call the elephant, the baby elephant, right? They would put these massive chain on it.
Called a baby elephant.
Anyway, I think it's called a calf. But anyway,
Okay.
but the point is you put
finally
these
scored a point.
massive chain on it so that it can't break free and get away. And after a while, once they've broken that elephant, now they only need that small rope.
Because the
and it was
elephant, as
enough.
an adult, believes that he or she is still chained to a
Correct.
huge
Right.
device
And
that they
there's no
cannot
reason.
escape.
Yep, and there's
In reality, that 1-ton creature can snap that rope like a frayed string, But that's another example of a manipulation that causes a belief system which is not true, but yet can imprison, in this case, the elephant. Just like we can become, as in the human condition, imprisoned by belief systems that are not even relatively true, because I don't believe in absolute truth, but I do believe in relative truth, that are true.
Yeah. I mean, going back to your example of growing up, I mean, if I'm sure that you have friends or family members that grew up in that same place that you were in, right?
Yeah.
That never transcended that mindset.
No.
Right.
And
today,
you know what happened?
Today
You know what
they
happened
still
to those
fighting
people?
with
They hate white cops. Members of my own literally hate white cops because they were profiled at some point in time.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there was white cop elitism going on, but if you caveat that out, I can understand why, if I were a white cop at that time, I might have profiled someone like me, because people like me were the ones committing most of the crime.
In that area.
Members of my own
Yeah.
family, because of their small, narrow-minded, myopic belief system, which is not even relatively true, have poisonous hatred toward certain members of white society.
And that's just unfortunate how we've created, that situation, and so the only way that I could see that, is by making changes, to our belief system.
What do you mean by changes?
Changes to our belief system.
Yes.
Because if we don't change the belief system, we're not going to change. So going back, like if we were to try to get that elephant to realize that, hey, you can pull the rope and break the rope and run away, you can do that. But of course, that's harder to do. But as a human person, that's a different story.
Yeah,
We
but
have
people,
been
this is Inside Reality. This is Jeffrey and Jimmy. Today we're talking about how one's truth is usually a function of your belief system. The problem with breaking belief systems is, and I have someone that I know on my dad's side of the family that is I'm sorry to say, not very enlightened, not very educated. And I asked my wife this a couple of times. She subscribes to a belief system where she hates Trump and everything he does is wrong. Anything Trump does is just, he's horrible. He's horrible.
Yeah.
The economy's horrible because of Trump. Gas is $4 a gallon in Albuquerque. And I told her, when idiot Biden was president, gas was $4.50.
and nobody.
She forgot, but she
Yeah.
forgot that.
Yeah.
She conveniently forgot that.
Yeah.
And this gas thing is temporary, anyway, in my view.
It's already chopped
But
down a little bit.
But
too.
for someone like this person to transcend their belief system and reconfigure an amended or a new belief system, what do you think the problem with that is?
Well, I mean, for one,
They have to admit
that
they
were
by
wrong.
the time you're not going to answer the question. They have to admit they were wrong.
Yeah, I just said
And
it.
not only do they have to admit they were wrong, they have to admit their whole life. Yeah, but I'll give you the answer. They have to admit that pretty much her whole adult life, she lived in a truth that was just false. So to admit that is almost to deny
I mean, that's the problem.
self. Right.
I'm reading your mind today.
I'm throwing
you
you a
can't do
softball.
it.
Anyway, that's why belief systems can be injurious to self and others, but that's why people don't break out of them, because
Yeah.
no one likes to admit that they are wrong. And not only that they're wrong, but they've lived portions of their life, maybe their entire life, in a spurious, false, I was wrong prison.
Yeah.
It's very hard to admit that.
Yeah, it is.
Very hard.
There's a great book called The Ant and the Elephant. I don't know if it's a book or audio. Anyway, I listened to an audio book of it. Anyway, and it talks about how, in our mind, we have two minds, right? We have a mind like an elephant, and then we have a mind like the ant. Okay, so the idea is that if you're an ant, you can't really steer the elephant, right? At least not easily, So as long, the ant can be going in the opposite direction and the elephant going that way, it's going to take the ant that way. Okay, it doesn't matter so the only way that you can change is if you change the direction that the elephant is going. Okay, and that's the subconscious mind. If you want to get into that whole mindset thing, right? So we have the conscious mind and the other than conscious mind, or the subconscious mind. Okay, so habits are things that are driven deep inside our mind that more or less control the outcome of what happens to us. And so unless we change the mind at a deeper level than just,
it's very hard though. It's very hard.
It is hard.
You have the id, you have the ego, you have the superego, basically comprising self, but then you fit into a family, then you fit into a work situation, then you fit into a neighborhood, then you fit into a community. I hate that word, community. Then you fit into a city, then you fit into a culture, you fit into the state's culture, depending on where you live. You live in an economic culture, and you want to be approved and liked. And so you have all these forces that in many ways are just antithetical to even relative truth. And so we, as people just wanting to not make too many waves, because most people are grotesquely lacking of courage, I'm sorry, just are, and constitution, they just don't question any of those influences. The id, the ego, the superego, the family, the community, where you work, your neighborhood, the city you're in, the state you live in, the culture you subscribe to. Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican, or whatever? You've got all these forces that really try to manipulate the hell out of the individual, the family, the group, and everything else.
Yeah.
It's hard to
It is.
even begin to question those dynamics, let alone resist and combat them.
Yeah. It's not even
But
hard.
that's what we're trying to do on this show, at least, is raise questions about it.
Yeah.
So at least you can begin to ask questions about, how is my ego, superego influencing my truth? How is my family influencing my truth? How is my neighborhood influencing my truth? How is my community, I hate that word, community, influencing? How is my city, influencing? Look at, if you lived in Portland, certain parts of Seattle, certain parts of Minneapolis, there's a city culture that says you need to be woke and progressive.
Yeah.
So even where you live, there are those influences. And all we're trying to do is question those damn influences and rise above them.
Well, sometimes it's easier said than done, and sometimes you can even argue that it's not just hard; it's even impossible to do. And the big challenge, again, going back to what you said earlier, if we're wrong with this, that means that we can be wrong with other things as well. And
absolutely.
So unless we come to the realization that, hey, there are things in life that we might be wrong, right? And we have to accept that. And until we come to that acceptance that we might be wrong, right? Maybe you have the belief that maybe you're not wrong ever. You're just mistaken, on occasion.
Well, I'll give you an example. I grew up with this very naive, innocent, manufactured belief that America's the greatest country of all time and being a patriot's good and all that. And then Watergate happened. And then the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination happened. And then 9/11 happened. And then now with the frickin' phone and instant communication and social media, one of the good things from that technology is it has revealed how much corruption is in every sector of our governance. I said it before, and I've said it again. So that's at the state level, at the city level, the municipal level, at the federal level, at the whatever level. And most people engaged in the machinations of political power are basically engaged in some kind of form of corruption here or there or the other. So my belief system that this is a great, patriotic, all that nonsense, I don't believe it anymore. I mean, I'm glad I'm in this country. It's a good country overall. There's more freedom here than most places. But like Churchill said about democracy, it's a bad form of government. Everything else is worse. But the level of pervasive corruption at almost every level of institutional bureaucracy and political power in this country is, and I've said it before, it's astonishing how much corruption is in every sector of institutional bureaucracy and institutional political power in this country. Republican, in Democrat, everywhere.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Hello, are you there?
Yeah, your audio. I mean, you cut out for a moment here, so we might have to check your your internet again.
No, I'm not going to go through that again.
Sorry.
I'm not going to do that.
Anyway, you bring up some interesting point. I mean, that is correct. I think that government is absolute and fine. There's a finality to government, meaning that once we have it established, that it'll be perfect. And I don't think that was the intention. That's why. But that's what people believe, or that's what people perceive to be the case. But remember,
the perfection of governance. You think people believe in the perfection of governance?
No. Well, when you're shocked that there's corruption, I mean, that's
no. No, that's not. One is not related to the other. I was just hoping for, once I became an adult, owned a business, worked at the chamber, was around all these fat politicians for 20 years. And again, I was around governors and senators and Congress people, city council people. I met 2 U.S. presidents. When I was around all these people, I recognized the best I could hope is for a functional, clumsy functional government. Yeah. I was never asking for perfection. All I was asking for was clumsy functionality. You don't even have that today. Look what's going on in airports as we do this podcast. In big cities, people are in lines to board a plane 3-4 hours, 5 hours, whatever, because of the dysfunction of our government.
Yeah.
Republicans and Democrats, man. Because of belief systems that are not congruent with each other, it causes chaos and dysfunction for the population they're supposed to be freaking serving. Pay the price. The American citizen. I don't even know what an American citizen is anymore, according to the Democrat woke people. We don't even have rights. The illegal aliens have more rights than U.S. citizens. Anyway. Got about 5 minutes and we're out of here.
I mean, there's also the convenience of that truth. There's we remember Lord Acton, right? You know, the whole saying, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that what you're describing there is that there's a certain inevitability that a system of government, whatever form it is, will tend towards corruption, which to me, that's why I appreciate what we have on one level, because the problem with the continuous power of one individual, right, that's where we see it. And so the term limit thing to me is an important part of dissipating some of that power so that it's not concentrated in.
But it's not just individuals,
so,
and it's not just corruption, it's dysfunction. The country is woefully dysfunctional in many regards.
I agree.
Woefully dysfunctional.
But here's the question.
So it's not just corrupt. What I was saying is the amount of corruption everywhere is astonishing. But almost at the same time, concomitantly, the amount of dysfunction almost everywhere you look is equally astonishing.
Yeah. And I would take it even one step further. There are, I would say, individuals or groups of individuals that have set a course to create this chaos. Okay.
Yes.
With deliberateness. Okay.
Of course.
So we have those 3 elements. Okay. You have corruption. You have dysfunction. Which is incompetence, and then you have the deliberate actions that are taken in order to create the scenario.
It's intended.
Correct.
It's an intended consequence. Yeah. There's volition behind.
Correct.
The incompetence and the dysfunction.
Yeah. Or they leverage that
because people ultimately get frustrated, and then they ultimately, I think, just ignore it. And by ignoring it, the power, the corruption, all the other stuff that goes on up here can continue
exactly
unbridled,
Correct.
unfettered.
Yep.
So it's a grand design to keep people what you ultimately want to do is get people to be completely disinterested
Yeah.
and apathetic and really ignorant to what the hell is
Yeah.
going on behind the wizard's curtain
Yeah.
with his little levers. And that's
And
what's happening.
yeah.
Most people don't vote,
Yeah.
most people don't vote. If you ever see people when they put a microphone to the man on the street, that, the
Yeah.
cliche
Yeah.
man on the street, what is the vice president's name? How does democracy differ from a republic?
Yeah.
Well, how many congresspersons are there in the United States Congress? How many congresspersons does it need to pass a legislative bill? And you'll get like,
Yeah.
I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, because none of that is taught in general. They're not even taught in school. And so we've already established that, right, in previous conversations, that we know that in the school system, what is
Not
being
only
taught
is it not taught, what I'm saying is it's pointless to even care or know it because you're so disarmed from making a difference that people don't even engage because they're not only not taught it, but even if they do know things about this stuff, like even I do and you do, I'm so apathetic about the whole thing. I don't even care to vote anymore.
Yeah, I get that, and that's what they want to get us to that. I mean,
Precise.
and really, this is why we're doing this show. I mean, carving out our time. Why I felt like why we need a show like this, where we can bring these these topics, these ideas, to the surface and these conversations. And I do appreciate the last, this past week we had a few people making comments and stuff that we can kind of engage in the comment. So I appreciate.
Well, why don't you talk about that next time so we can give some of those people that took the time to comment, give them some regard. So
well, they are regarded. I mean, in the comments,
we only have 2 minutes. What were the comments?
I don't remember right now, but well, I mean, I was reading through the comments and then writing responses and stuff. There was a guy, he was really complaining about our show, but it seems like he came around and he's, his last, at least he gave a really good argument on something that I haven't had a chance to respond to yet. So, but anyway, I just want to say that I appreciate, people that are being constructive in their, and sharing their ideas, or maybe if they don't agree with us, say, hey, I don't agree with you, this is why, or whatever. That's what we want. We don't need ad hominem type of attacks or anything like that. Those we can care less for. So I do appreciate the person coming around to that. And so anyway, any last thoughts, Jeffrey? So you think that this is doom? You believe that we're doomed because in your mind
the country as we know it is the United States of America, and the Constitution and the economic apparatus that we basically subscribe to, which is mostly capitalistic. All of that is, I think, 20 years or less, the whole thing is done.
Yeah. I mean, certainly if the path that we are on, that will definitely be the outcome unless we make...
Well, mostly because in terms of the economic part, and I'll conclude with this, people that are incentivized to generate wealth and be entrepreneurial and work hard, they're basically cast as oppressive people and bad people by most of the woke, and not only woke, but even some moderate Democrats position millionaires and billionaires and people who own businesses and corporations and all that. And there is some truth to that. But if you're continually being castigated for generating wealth and being entrepreneurial, why should you continue to do that?
Yeah.
Because the generators of wealth are going to continue to not generate as much anymore. And the people that don't generate wealth are taking more from government and taxpayers like you and me.
At some point, it's
untenable. Yeah. It's unsustainable. That's why we're doomed. And it's going to be doomed not so much for sociological reasons, but for economic ones. Your friend Karl Marx did it 180 years ago.
My friend.
All right. I'll see you guys later.
That only outcome is because that very construct is the undergirding that have slipped in to create that scenario that we're talking about here. So it's just that it's not class in terms of the wealthy and the because we had a strong middle class. I mean, but now it's they've been reframed with the oppressed and oppressors, so that
All right, we'll see you later.
So-
Bye-bye.